As a result of the assault, Russia now faces more sanctions from countries all over the world, including the U.S.
President Biden ordered a freeze on more Russian banks and cut off Russia's industries and military of the U.S. technology. We're joined now by CSU political science professor Dr. Peter Harris, who focuses on international security and foreign policy. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Harris, this morning. We want to get right to it. Do you expect the sanctions to have any impact?
Good morning. They will have an impact. They will have some bite in Russia. They will affect Russians' daily lives and their economy, for sure. But whether they'll have an impact on President Putin's decision-making calculus, I don't think so. The sanctions they didn't stop the war, the threat of sanctions, and the imposition of sanctions won't stop the war either. The only thing that would stop Vladimir Putin is him achieving his objectives in Ukraine. So really, that's what we're waiting for now, is him to impose a military solution on the country.
And Dr. Harris, as we've seen, NATO's hands are tied a little bit militarily. I mean, Ukraine was being considered to join NATO, but right now those 30 member countries have decided not to get involved militarily, including the U.S. How can they respond to help Ukraine at this time?
That's right. A military intervention in Ukraine is really not feasible. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, so to fight Russia is to risk provoking a nuclear war. Putin knows that, and that's why he feels confident in invading Ukraine in the way that he's done it. And it's also why he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO, because the United States has got nuclear weapons, and he wouldn't want to provoke a nuclear war with the United States. NATO's only recourse is to try and secure its borders. There's a potential to help arm an insurgency in Ukraine against the Russian invaders. But even that, I think, will make some NATO members nervous in the sense that they do not wish to provoke a larger war with a nuclear-armed state.
Well, we've heard, of course, concerns that Ukraine may not be the end game here, that the Baltic states could be next on Putin's list. What are your thoughts on that? Are they right to be worried?
I think they're right to be worried. What we're witnessing in Ukraine is unprecedented. A nation state attacking another nation state in Europe, essentially trying to bring down its government, and what looks like a play for the conquest of Ukraine. So that certainly right to be worried. I would be too. I would doubt that Putin would consider a conventional attack on any NATO member, though. I mean, to risk triggering Article 5 and an attack on one NATO member being an attack on all NATO members is unlikely from my perspective.
What is the end game here of Vladimir Putin? Is it simply to regain control of Ukraine and offer more of a buffer from Western ideology? I mean, it really feels like we're slipping back decades into a more Soviet era.
I don't think the end game is Ukraine. I think you have to look to the list of demands that Russia gave NATO back in December. He wanted NATO forces to pull back to 1997 deployments, which means out of the Baltics, out of Poland, all the way back to Germany. We wouldn't give him that last week. We wouldn't give him it a month ago. We wouldn't give him it last year. I think he wants to make the people of Ukraine suffer so badly that leaders in the West come back to the negotiating table with the blood drained from their faces. He wants to make Ukraine hurt so badly that President Biden, President Macron, others are forced to come back to him and give him the bigger items that he wants in terms of a new security order for Europe.
Of course, with the sanctions, we're trying to make it more painful for Putin and Russia before they can make it more painful in Ukraine. I mean, is that going to happen, do you think?
Sanctions hurt, but they don't hurt as much as bombs and rockets. So the people of Ukraine are going to suffer very badly. There'll be a lot of refugees. There'll be death. I expect the government will surrender or it will be replaced. So Putin knows that he can inflict much more pain on Ukrainians than we can inflict on Russians' pocketbooks. He knows that we care about Ukraine, even though it's not a NATO member. He knows that people like President Biden care deeply about the plight of Ukrainians. He's a cruel man, and he knows that he can hurt those people so badly that we may come back to the negotiating table and offer him more than we did a week ago.
And you have to assume that he weighed the consequences. He knew sanctions would be coming. He weighed the consequences of invading Ukraine versus those sanctions before he invaded. Dr. Peter Harris, we certainly appreciate your time and insight this morning.